So I'm Tim Minshall. I'm from the University of Cambridge Institute for Manufacturing, and I'll be chairing today's launch of the 2025 UK Innovation Report. And so clearly this is a very interesting time for innovation and industrial policy and industrial activity for the UK, given all the things that are going on that don't need explaining here. But my role is just to go briefly through the agenda before handing over to those who have the real knowledge and real content here. So this welcome will finish very shortly, and then I'll hand over to Lord David Sainsbury, University of Cambridge Chancellor, and also the former UK Minister for Science and Innovation, to set the scene for what is for the report itself. Then I'll hand over to Dr. Carlos Lopez Gomez, Head of the Policy Links Unit at the Institute for Manufacturing, to draw out the key findings from this year's report. Then we're going to switch to a panel discussion. I'll introduce the panelists at the time, but the idea there will be we have a series of themes we'd like them to comment upon, but then there will also be time for questions from the audience too. So if you're, as we're going through this, please be thinking up and reflecting on any possible questions, both for those in the room and also online, of course.
To highlight the importance of the UK Innovation Report 2025. I think it's one of the extraordinary things that while economists cannot agree why in the last 35 years the UK, in common with other G7 countries, has had a low rate of economic growth. In fact, the explanation is very simple. Around about 1990, three main economies in the world began to be transformed into dynamic market economies. Deng Xiaoping started introducing major market reforms into China. Finance Minister Manmohan Singh started liberalizing the Indian economy, while the Russian Federation collapsed, and countries like Poland, which had a history of being a market economy, suddenly started flourishing again, and German companies particularly started putting their manufacturing plants there because of the cheap labor. And this meant that the G7 countries had to face a vast increase in competition from these huge countries, which have learned how to make the same products and goods as we do, and do so while paying very significantly lower wages to their workers. And the basic question we have to face is how should we respond to this? I think it's obviously nonsensical to think that the way to compete is by trying to lower the wages of the workforce in a race to the bottom. Instead, we should try to compete in what I called in a report that I did for Gordon Brown, to compete in a race to the top. That is, we have to move into the more knowledge-intensive, more difficult areas to be in, where our skills and knowledge can give us still some kind of competitive advantage. Now, the question is, how do you do that? And the answer is because it is innovation that really makes the difference, because it's an innovation that enables a country to move up the ladder of economic development, and that means it is the real engine of economic growth. I think still too many people think that investment is the real engine of economic growth. And that's why I think the innovation report produced by the Institute of Manufacturing at Cambridge is so important. I think this year again, Carlos Lopez Gomez and his team has done an excellent job, and the report includes a number of very important charts for business leaders and policymakers. And I think the UK Innovation Report 2025 gives us a mass of information about what we need to do, and then therefore is an extremely important contribution to this discussion. Thank you very much.
Now, what is the UK Innovation Report and why does it matter? There are plenty of reports that are looking at innovation and a great number of indicators that are trying to measure innovation. But what the UK Innovation Report aims to offer is a clear, accessible resource that helps bring together the dots, connecting the different databases that we have at the national and international levels. So we try to do this in 3 ways. First, we curate key indicators that give us a picture of the UK's innovation and industrial landscape, benchmarking the UK against leading economies, and providing a data-driven evidence base to inform policy. So ultimately, we want the report to be just more than statistics. We want it to be a tool for national dialogue that helps inform industrial and innovation strategies. So this is the 5th year of the report, and we're pleased to see it increasingly referenced in industry reports as well as policy documents. Just a recap of the 5 key messages and the big question they pose for the future. Now, first, this is a defining moment for the UK's industrial competitiveness. Global competition is intensifying, but the UK still has world-class capabilities in key industries. The UK industrial strategy and the sector plans present a historic opportunity, but beyond the usual indicators like investment, R&D, and startups, their true success will be measured perhaps by one key metric, and that is whether they can reverse the UK's lagging competitiveness and restore its position in high-value industries. Second, manufacturing is receding but still vital. Rather than getting caught on a false debate between manufacturing versus services, we need to focus on the data and recognize how these sectors reinforce each other and contribute to variables like capital investment, productivity growth, and job creation. Ignoring manufacturing's role in the economy contradicts UK's national policy goals and weakens the broader economic landscape. Third, the UK leads in government support for business R&D. But the big question is, what is the right balance between grants and tax credits to drive the goals of the industrial strategy and in specific sectors and subsectors? Fourth, despite high tertiary education levels, the UK still faces skills mismatches. Competing in future industries requires closing these gaps and boosting vocational training. So much is said about this, but how well is this problem understood in specific sectors and subsectors? And finally, the UK is a global leader in renewable energy technologies and other technologies, but how can we turn this strength into future industrial growth?
So if we maybe sort of push forward a little bit and look at this issue, and starting with the global competition side of things, things are getting increasingly, I was going to say the word hostile, I don't mean that, as aggressive competition, and it's presenting numerous challenges. Can I just stick with you for a moment, Grace, if I may, and say from your perspective, being in a manufacturing business, any comment you wanted to make on that about what things we can be doing to ensure that we do remain competitive?
I think certainly for us as a small company who predominantly supply into the larger organisations, we've noticed that our access to any type of funding is challenging. Mm-hmm. So when we say about the R&D direct funding, it's an interesting one. I don't want to go into it too much in this context, but geographically where we're located, we don't see a huge amount of that because it ends up going elsewhere. We're based in Derbyshire. I'll let you put those things together. So it's challenging in that it's difficult as a small organisation to innovate and to be funded to innovate if you don't have enough funds internally to enable that. Sometimes what is classed as innovation globally and ticks the boxes for an innovation grant isn't actually innovative for a smaller organisation. Some things that are kind of almost generic are relatively innovative to enable the organisations to progress.
We have energy costs so huge, it's the number one concern of our members going into 2025. And just to echo what Grace just said, from our members' point of view, all we're hearing is that the cumulative impact of different pressures from all sides is making the competitiveness of the UK hard, whether that's regulation or whether that is costs.
Given that advanced manufacturing is one of the 8 growth areas in the Green Paper that is leading to our industrial strategy, I just wondered, maybe starting with Andy, any comments about where we need to prioritise activities to ensure we deal with this issue of, if it's a growth sector, we hear the challenges happening there, what can be done about it?
Sure. So, I mean, ultimately, it will be a mix of a range of different factors to kind of drive a strong business environment. But I suppose three reflections from me would be, firstly, around technology adoption. Discussing kind of colleagues in the office this morning around, you know, on the one hand, the UK has huge strengths in robotics, but when it comes to advanced manufacturing, companies aren't kind of adopting robotics to the same extent. The stat, please correct me if incorrect, I was told this morning is kind of 109 robots used in companies for every 10,000 people, which I found quite a surprising fact. And so work is ongoing kind of within government, got the Chief Scientific Advisor and National Technology Advisor kind of leading a technology adoption review, which will help support the industrial strategy, really kind of identify the funding, the skills, the behavioural changes required to kind of really increase tech adoption, not just in advanced manufacturing, but across kind of our sectors. So to kind of extend that slightly to others, I mean, the use of artificial intelligence, even just kind of enterprise software, kind of accounting, customer relationship, all of these kind of things to really apply technology as far as possible to increase productivity. Secondly, there's something around access to finance, I suppose it kind of builds upon this and helping companies really navigate the valley of death, the cliche there, and making sure that financial institutions, be they public or private, are aware of how to kind of, giving them the information, the support to kind of take more risk, basically, and understanding that for manufacturing, for hardware investment, understanding that where that's such an initial upfront cost, that there's long-term value to be there. But again, kind of away from manufacturing, also understanding how to value the intangible assets that organisations have, and making sure that from be it the British Business Bank or the National Wealth Fund or kind of financial markets more broadly, that it's really clear that the access to finance can be provided there.
I think it's very fair to say, in the world of an industrial strategy, and with the sort of, the sort of competitive advantages that we want to kind of seize, it's very reasonable to say, actually, we could do a better job making our incentives more directed, and that has real power, because it's not just, I think the point that was made about government's spend on R&D. What actually allows R&D to have an impact in the real world and create business growth are all what we might describe those kind of pull-through factors. It is whether your regulatory system is effective for businesses. It's whether your NHS is buying the products that your innovative medtech companies are producing. And a more directed approach, I think, can allow, and this is absolutely what the intention of the industrial strategy is, can allow you to align those different levers behind your investment to deliver kind of greater impact. But it's just worth remembering, I think remembering as well, that you also have to give businesses that flexibility. You have to remember that over the long term, new sectors emerge, new technologies come to the fore, and we have to create the space in our R&D system and our support for it that allows the things that government didn't prioritise now, but it should do in the future, to bubble up and become the successes of 20 or 30 years' time.
I mean, when we developed the report, we talked to companies, we talked to industry associations, and I think I do recognize this point about competition and how many companies believe that they're not in competition with a region in Germany or a company in Singapore, but sometimes they're in competition with the whole industrial strategy of other countries. And car company was telling us, well, we compete to the whole lander strategy of this region, right? And I think to the point that you mentioned and the flexibility of the variety of mechanisms, I think the sector strategies, sector plans could have a great role there if we identify, I mean, there's something that brings sectors together. There's some knowledge, some skills, around a product, around some knowledge type. But the companies are different. Smaller companies probably cannot access some of those big R&D grants, but they require other types of innovations, like whether it's lean or they're just spending on energy efficient technologies. So we see it as a pyramid. A sector is a pyramid in which you have at the top those smaller number of companies that will access those big R&D tax credits. And then we have kind of the basis of the pyramids. Many companies don't have R&D departments, engineering departments, or design departments, so it's very difficult for them to apply for those grants. But in other countries, you will see that they get support from the Länder or from the prefectures in Japan to do that basic innovation activity. And that's why I think the sector plans have a great potential if we look at it as something that brings them together, but at the same time, the variety of companies and the different types of support that are required for them.
So to skills, and I'm going to turn, well, where to begin with this? So we've all, I think, agreed that seeing those numbers writ starkly there and having that international comparison really is quite an eye-opening moment. But do we understand what the problem really is? And do we know what we could do about it? And I hope this isn't unfair, but Grace, turning to you first, any thoughts on that, on either of those points?
I don't think people do understand what the problem really is, because we can see that there is a gap. We don't have enough people in manufacturing. We've got people who are overqualified for their jobs but don't have the vocational understanding, etc. But actually the requirements that a company like Atlas need are very different to, I don't know, Vestas who, or somebody who are a much bigger organisation. And I think so the skills that we need now, I think we were talking about what we need now and in 10 years and what have you, we need now to be able to catch up with where the larger players already are, just with understanding digital technologies. So there's the Made Smarter programme, for example, we're part of that, and that's been wonderful because to get on board with the Made Smarter programme, there wasn't a huge amount of red tape to get through, which was great because we don't have people available to do that. But also it highlighted the fact that we are, as an organisation, and I don't think we're any different to most SMEs, is there's a lot of digital technology that's out there that we don't know about. And there's a reference to advanced manufacturing, you know, we keep talking about that, but what does it actually mean? And it hasn't really been clearly defined what advanced manufacturing is, and has it deliberately been left open to cover the point that Oliver made, you know, because it's going to change with time. But certainly I would class what we do, even though it's quite hands-on and we do low volume, so robotics isn't necessarily the skills gap that we need because we don't do the volume to warrant that capital expenditure. But certainly automating our processes and having more streamlined digital understanding, that is of huge benefit. So actually the skills that we need are not necessarily what one would think. They're not necessarily apprentices who are going to do the hands-on work. They could be software engineers that help bring stuff together. Right. So it's recognising the fact that manufacturing doesn't necessarily always need what you immediately think, because the landscape is changing.